Hey class, welcome to Sociology. I'm going to just post a brief uh, presentation here to give you some clear details on some of these common terms used in research methods so that you can get started on your assignment this afternoon, and then you'll also be working on it the following class period, okay? So we're looking at quantitative versus qualitative. That's going to be the class activity that you're going to do at the end here of today. So how do sociologists actually conduct their research? Well, there are four specific categories, four specific things they need to hit in order to do this. All right, the first is they need to have a topic. So they need to choose a topic that they're interested in. And in this case, we're talking about spouse abuse today. So the topic would be spouse abuse. Next, they need to define the problem. Right, so this is where they're going to have to specify some more detail about what you're looking for in that topic. So an example of this could be what can be done to rescue spouse abuse, or it's not to rescue, to lower spouse abuse. Okay, number three, review the literature. So there's already a lot of literature and research out there. Therefore, as a sociologist, you need to be looking for where that research lacks. Right, so we don't want to waste our time studying things that have already been looked at. So where are there areas in that research that lack? That's what you want to focus on so that you can further the study of that topic and of that problem. And then lastly, here we have formulating a hypothesis, okay? So a statement of what you expect to find according to the predictions from your from a theory, and then you're going to operationally define those variables and those factors that change throughout in your research, okay? Generally speaking, this is having a hypothesis, having independent, dependent variables that's going to be related to an experiment, right? So our variables here, our operationally defined variables here, could be things like what is socially, this word here, right? Socially integrated, okay? Socially integrated, all right? How do we define that? Okay, what does that involve, right? That would be related to an operational definition when looking at those factors. So this is our hypothesis here. Now, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the experimental method is really the only game in town used to find and establish cause and effect when looking at all the different types of research methods out there. Right? You've got case studies, you've got surveys, you've got interviews, you've got observational method. Okay, all those other methods, which are great, cannot find causation. So while correlation is good at showing us relationships between variables, the experimental method is the only method that allows us to draw conclusions based on cause and effect. Okay, so we're looking at this topic, spouse abuse, right? Now, if I want to look at correlations, I could reference this chart, right? Height and temperament of men. Okay, I got this out of my AP psychology book, but this here is showing me that height in men is generally fairly correlated to men to temperament, right? But it doesn't tell me why. It doesn't tell me what the cause of that is, what the cause of that temperament is. Okay, it just shows me a correlation. Now, once I have a method that I'm going to use, right? The experimental method. I've got a topic, and I've got a problem that I want to research. I now need to come up with a hypothesis, and then I need to come up with independent variables and dependent variables within that hypothesis so that I can label it about what I am studying. So again, this should be review, but the independent variable is the variable that is called the cause variable, right? It's the experimental variable which causes something to happen. So any factor that changes the dependent variable, any factor that changes the dependent variable or is manipulated by the experimenter, this is the independent variable, right? And then you have the dependent variable. The dependent variable is dependent on the independent variable, all right? It's the effect variable. So the experimental variable which is affected by the independent variable. Anything that influences the outside factor or the outcome of that experiment is going to be the dependent variable, right? It's the outcome, okay? The outcome of our experiment. So let's look at an example using our understanding of the research method, the independent variable, the dependent variable, and our topic today, which is spouse abuse. Let's look at an example. So here we have a hypothesis, right? And so the hypothesis, before I get into the hypothesis, I'm going to give you a background story, right, of what I'm studying, okay? So let's say a judge in Chicago allows me to conduct research on spouse abuse, right? And I'm given jurisdiction to conduct my research within a specific facilitation of a police officer present, looking at 75 different men who have been recently arrested from ages 25 to 65 in the city of Chicago for this specific crime of spouse abuse. Now, that's my population size, right? And I have to, make sure I have a good representation of a population, making sure it's of different socioeconomic classes, of different ethnicities, of different ages, right? And I need to do a random sample, okay? So after I've done all that and I've got my sample population and my hypothesis here, which is abusive husbands that do not receive psychotherapy are likelier to resume abusive behavior compared to abusive husbands that do not receive psychotherapy. Once I've got my hypothesis, I've got my sample population, and I've got the legal rights to do this research, well, I need to label my independent and my dependent variables very clearly so that I know what I'm measuring in this experiment, right? So my independent variable is obviously going to be psychotherapy. Okay, that is going to be the cause variable of the results. The dependent variable, the outcome, is going to be the husband's behavior after that therapy is given. All right, so I got my control group, I got my experimental group here, and in this case, I also need to look at the possibility of my operational definitions, right? So this is going to help me define those variables precisely so that I can actually measure what I'm trying to measure. And that way my research can be repeatable because I want others to be able to repeat and build upon my research, right? My research isn't really reliable if it's not repeatable, right? The reliability of research is that it is repeatable, okay? So in this case, my operational definition here could be records indicating rearrestment for abuse, right? So if I'm trying to operationally define likelier to resume abusive behavior, right? Or husband's behavior after therapy, I guess is what I should really be operationally defining. I need to explain what that means, right? So, rearrest, if they are rearrested for abuse, this clearly defines what I mean by husband's behavior after therapy, okay? And there could be confounding variables as well, okay, in research. And in this case, a confounding variable may be that the women don't report the abuse because they're afraid of their husband, okay? So this is what we would do when we're looking at our independent variable, our dependent variable, and our operational definitions. Okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to look at these specific variables. I want you to try to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable listed on the next 6 questions. Okay, so take a minute to do this and respond in the comment section as it pops up. Okay, so hopefully you did okay on those questions. And again, remember the independent variable is the cause variable, dependent variable is the effect variable. So looking at this last part of the presentation here, remember we've got other types of research methods out there. Case studies, they're in-depth observations of one event or a specific individual, very useful for extreme cases. So a lot of times a case study can be just a singular individual that you're doing research on, and interviewing it. You may not even be interviewing that person. You may be interviewing people around them. It could be interviewing parents or interviewing the therapist of that individual that you're doing research on. Okay. Next, you've got surveys and interviews. This is going to be some type of questionnaire or face-to-face interview. Positives of this is it's fairly affordable. Negatives, it can have wording effects, right, or bias in how you word the survey or the questions in the interview. Next, you have the secondary analysis. This is when you use data that has already been collected by researchers. So this is also very useful and can help further our research. This could even be used within research, right, within a different method here. But the downside to this is that you're using data that's already been collected from another researcher, so it's not your own personal research that you've done yourself. But in this case, you're analyzing interviews, you're analyzing surveys, you're analyzing observations done by other researchers. Okay, and then lastly, you've got observational or naturalistic research methods, and this is recording behavior in more real-life situations. Okay, an issue with this is the generalizability. You know, what you may apply to one group of people, you can't necessarily apply to the entire group, right? So generalization could be an issue with it. But of course, like in the case of spouse abuse, you can't just watch someone get abused, right? So you need to look for a different context of how you're going to conduct that research. Where are you going to conduct that research? Maybe at a crisis intervention center for women or something of that nature. Okay? So these are the types of research methods. And what I'm going to have you do here is I'm also going to have you practice on research methods. Looking at these 5 types of research methods, I want you to write in the comment section which each one is, right? Is it case study? Is it experiment? Is it secondary analysis, etc. of the ones that we've discussed during this presentation? All right, so take a minute to do that. So referencing the very first slide here, we're looking at the qualitative, quantitative activity, which you guys are going to be doing. So these are really important words for you to understand when doing your assignment. So qualitative is descriptive, it's narrative form, right? It's generally smaller groups. You're looking at how it's conducted, right? So generally maybe case studies or naturalistic observations would be used for this kind of research. And you cannot generalize findings to the larger population, right? So again, remember qualitative is more in relation to verstehen. You're putting yourself in the shoes of someone else, right? And there are generally fewer participants, so it's more in depth, right? In this kind of research. Questions asked by an interview or a case study are generally more open-ended, okay? More open-ended, so like who and what and why and when and how are going to be questions that you see more so in qualitative research. All right, it seeks to understand the nature and the quality of a specific phenomenon that's happening. Quantitative research, you've got quantitative reports, which is you're going to be doing a bit of both of these. They're more numerical, they look at larger groups, they're related to the surveys, experiments, and we can actually generalize our findings to the larger population through quantitative research. Okay, so it's more numerical. We know researchers kind of know more so of what they're looking for, and you've got larger data sample sizes, often done by surveys, given reliable results of correlations that are made. Okay, so questions here on quantitative are going to be more close-ended, right, versus qualitative are going to be more open-ended. So I'm asking questions like how many, how often, how much. Right? I'm seeking to describe the idea of the magnitude of the significance. I don't need all the qualitative descriptions of why and how did that happen. And I just need a magnitude of significance to show the statistics of my research. Right? I'm looking for numerical data. All right. Now for your assignment, let's get into that. Okay, so you're going to be conducting a qualitative and a quantitative study. So you're going to do one of each. All right. Again, qualitative, we're looking at that which is more descriptive. Okay, quantitative, we're looking at that which is more close-ended and numerical. So, for instance, my hypothesis here is students at ICS will be more likely to follow a dress code that they help to create. So you need to come up with a hypothesis, you need to come up with a problem, you need to come up with a topic that you want to research and that you're interested in. All right, and that people would be interested in being involved with and helping you out with this project. Okay, so be as creative as you would like, have fun with this, and put some effort into it. Do a good job with this. Don't do something that's mediocre. Make it interesting. Okay, so for a survey, I'm going to be using for my quantitative. I'm going to do some kind of type of survey and using a graph to represent my data, and then for my qualitative reporting, I'm going to be conducting an interview, and this is going to be more so in the form of a narrative format. So for instance, this is a really kind of crummy example, but it's just to give you an idea of what I'm looking for in your Google Slides presentation. But right, I've got my hypothesis on my title slide. I got my name on it. It's pretty clear what I'm going to be studying, so you need to actually put the name of your study here, whatever it is that you're researching. So in this case, I'm researching the dress code of ICS, and I've got my qualitative example here. I've got my interview questions listed. Do you always follow the dress code? Why or why not? Down here, I could probably ask why, right? So since not having a dress code is not an option, would you be more likely to follow / have a positive attitude towards a dress code that you helped to create? And then maybe ask why or explain, right? You want something that's descriptive. You don't want yes or no questions generally. Maybe to start off, you might ask a few yes or no questions to give your interviewee a bit of momentum in the process. But you want description. You want it to be open-ended, okay? And then here are just some examples of summaries of each participant of the research that I studied, okay, related to the 6 people that I interviewed, that I pretend interviewed. I didn't actually interview these people. I made this all up. But, okay, and then I've got my quantitative example here. I got my survey question rating bar for how I'm going to measure people's answers and responses to my questions. Okay, these are going to be close-ended. I'm looking for numerical data here to show the significance of my research on a magnitude scale. So that's how I would measure it: 1, 2, or 3, or yes or no. And then I've got my graph here, okay, of the representation of my data. Okay, so for your assignment, here are your directions. You're going to be interviewing 3 people in class and 3 people out of class for your qualitative research. All right, this is the more open-ended questions, the narrative format. And then you're going to be interviewing and surveying, well, I guess not interviewing, surveying 8 to 10 people outside of class and 8 to 10 people inside of class. So we've got about 10 people in class. So that should be, all 10 of you should work together, you know. Hey, I'll interview you if you interview me, and etc. All right. So that way uh, you're both helping each other out. Okay, and for this you need to come up with some kind of group, not group. You need to come up with some kind of graph. Okay, table or chart. You can use whichever you would like. You don't have to use the same type of graph that I used, but it needs to be a good representation of your data. So go ahead, you're going to do this individually. This is an individual activity, and then you're going to be presenting. I know I have on here that you're going to present your video on screencast, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to have you guys present next week during our Zoom session. So you'll basically have this whole week to conduct your research and work on this, and then next week on Monday I'll have you guys just present them. Okay, so you have plenty of time to get this done, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me. All right, I will see you all later.